Evelyn Price walked into that boardroom with 6 months of pregnancy and a resignation letter already waiting on the table in front of her. Not because she had failed, not because she had done anything wrong, but because the man sitting at the head of the table, the man who had once called her his partner, had spent months and millions of dollars making sure she would never hold the reins of the company she had built with her own hands again. She signed, because in that moment, she believed she was completely alone. But in the hallway of the 14th floor of the Nexum Corp Tower that same afternoon, a man stood waiting to pick up his daughter. A man who had no idea he was about to change everything. 9 years before that morning, Evelyn Price had nothing except a handwritten business plan and a stubbornness that no one who knew her could fully explain. She was 25 years old. Her bank account was overdrawn. Her apartment had no dining table, so she worked on the kitchen counter with a laptop that took 4 minutes to boot up. She did not come from money. She did not come from connections. She came from the kind of quiet, grinding ambition that does not announce itself, it simply refuses to stop. The plan she wrote was for a healthcare technology platform she called Nexum Corp. The idea was precise and specific, a centralized data infrastructure that allowed mid-sized hospital networks to share patient information across departments in real time, cutting down on duplicate testing, misdiagnoses, and the kind of administrative confusion that cost both money and lives. It was not a flashy concept. It was a deeply useful one. Jason Merrill found her through a mutual contact at a university pitch event. He was 51 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore his wealth like a well-tailored coat, present but never ostentatious. He read the business plan overnight. He called her the next morning. He told her he invested in people, not in ideas. He said he saw something in her that most investors never looked for: the discipline to build slowly and the courage to think large at the same time. He put in the first round of capital. They co-founded the company together. He held 31% of the equity. She held 31%. The remaining 38% was distributed among a small group of institutional investors and board members who joined over the following 3 years. For 6 of those 9 years, the arrangement worked. Nexum Corp grew from a team of 7 people in a shared co-working space into a tower in the financial district with 800 employees, contracts with 14 hospital networks across the country, and a valuation that had crossed $340 million by the time Evelyn turned 33. She was profiled by 3 national business publications. She sat on 2 industry panels. She turned down a speaking invitation from a conference she considered beneath the company's level, and that decision alone generated more coverage than most companies get from a press campaign. And through all of it, she carried a small tin of ginger crackers in her handbag. Not because she liked them. She had never particularly liked ginger crackers. But she was 6 months pregnant, and her stomach turned every morning around 9 o'clock without fail, and she had learned that 3 crackers eaten quietly under the conference table prevented the kind of physical discomfort that she could not afford to show in a room full of men who were already looking for reasons to question her. Focus. No one on the board knew she was pregnant. She was waiting for the right moment to tell them. She understood that in the world she inhabited, a pregnancy was not simply news. In the wrong room, at the wrong time, it was leverage for other people. It was a way for them to write a story about her that she had not written herself. She had spent 9 years making sure no one else wrote her story. She was already too late. Her assistant, Giselle Marsh, was 31 years old and had worked with Evelyn for 4 years. She was the kind of person who noticed things without being asked to notice them, the kind of quiet intelligence that powerful people either take completely for granted or recognize as irreplaceable. Evelyn had recognized it within the first 3 months. On a Tuesday morning in October, Giselle placed a single sheet of paper on Evelyn's desk. She did not explain it. She simply set it down, tapped the upper right corner once with 2 fingers, and walked back to her own station. The paper was a printed email. It had been forwarded incorrectly, sent to an address that differed from the intended recipient by a single transposed letter, and from there had been routed automatically to a shared administrative inbox that Giselle monitored. It contained a meeting invitation. The attendees listed were Jason Merrill, Adrian Cole, and 3 of the 5 remaining board members. The location was the private conference suite on the 20th floor. The time was 6:30 in the morning that coming Thursday. The agenda field contained a single line. Asterisk, Leadership Continuity Review, Preliminary Discussion. Asterisk. Evelyn's name was not on the invitation. She read the email once. Then she folded the paper, placed it in the inner pocket of her blazer, and returned to the presentation she had been reviewing. She ate one ginger cracker. She drank a sip of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She had always known what betrayal smelled like. She had first encountered it at 22, in a professional context she rarely discussed. It smelled like cold coffee, like something completely ordinary that you only notice when it is already too late to do anything about the temperature. Thursday came. Evelyn arrived at the building at 6:15. The basement parking level was nearly empty, but the private elevator, the one that served the executive suites on floors 19 through 22, showed a recent access log on the security panel. 2 swipes. 6:08 and 6:12. Giselle was already in the lobby, her coat still on. She said nothing when she saw Evelyn's face. She only said, "Cole's car is in level 2. Merrill used valet." Evelyn rode the elevator to the 20th floor. When she opened the door to the private conference suite, all 5 people inside turned to look at her. No one stood up. Jason Merrill sat at the head of the table and offered the kind of smile that people only produce when the outcome has already been decided, and the performance is just courtesy. It was a small smile, almost gentle. On the table in front of each seat was a copy of a document bound in dark blue, 47 pages. The cover read in capital letters, Asterisk, Executive, Performance, Review Transition Period, Asterisk. Adrian Cole, the company's chief financial officer, 44 years old, with the particular brand of competence that made him excellent at executing other people's visions, and the particular vanity that made him loyal to whoever's vision was most advantageous, slid a copy across the table, toward Evelyn, without a word. She sat down. She opened it. The document was meticulous. It was the kind of meticulous that takes months to prepare, which told her something important about the timeline. Financial figures had been adjusted selectively, not wildly falsified, but nudged in specific directions to create a cumulative picture of underperformance. Internal emails had been excerpted with their context stripped. Meeting minutes had been reframed. Every individual piece was defensible. The architecture as a whole was a fabrication. The conclusion, on page 44, read, Asterisk, the current Chief Executive Officer is experiencing health circumstances that present material risk to sustained operational leadership. In the long-term interest of the organization, the board recommends a temporary transfer of executive authority pending further evaluation. Asterisk, health circumstances. That was the phrase they had chosen. Not pregnancy, not maternity, health circumstances. Precise enough to suggest impairment. Vague enough to deny intent. She closed the report. She placed both hands flat on the cover. "I'll need time to review this with legal counsel," she said. Jason shook his head. Not impatiently. Almost regretfully. He drew a single sheet of paper from the folder in front of him and placed it on the table between them. It was a termination agreement. 1 page. The language was clean and final. "Evelyn," he said, "we've thought about this carefully. If you cooperate, your equity stake will be purchased at fair market value. You'll be protected. You'll be comfortable." He paused. "If you don't, the financial review process will take months. The press will find it eventually, and you'll be giving birth while under investigation." It was the first time anyone in that room had mentioned the child. The room was silent, except for the ventilation system. She thought about the folder with the 47 pages. She thought about the 3 lawyers she had not yet called. She thought about the forwarded email, still folded in the inside pocket of the blazer she had worn on Tuesday. Her hands were not entirely still, not from fear. The baby had moved a distinct, firm pressure against her ribs. It had happened precisely then, as if the timing were intentional. She picked up the pen. She signed. Giselle was standing at the far end of the hallway when Evelyn came out. She took one look at Evelyn's face and understood everything. Her eyes reddened immediately. Evelyn said, "Get my coat." She did not cry. It was not that she was too strong to cry. It was that tears need a safe place to fall, and in that hallway, under those fluorescent lights, with the sound of 5 men in a boardroom, behind her already moving on to the next item on the agenda. That place did not yet exist. 3 weeks passed. Evelyn's apartment was large, and she was in it alone most of the time. Her work laptop was gone, returned as part of the agreement. Her corporate phone number had been deactivated. The company laptop she had used at home was technically still hers, but the access credentials had expired the morning after she signed. She contacted 3 attorneys in the first week. The first 2 declined before she finished explaining the situation. Nexum Corp was a client of both firms. The third listened to the full account and then told her plainly, "They've prepared this too carefully. What you have right now is a narrative. What you need is original evidence data that hasn't passed through their hands." She had the ginger crackers. She still ate them, though there was no boardroom table to sit beneath anymore. The financial press covered her departure in a single sentence on a Thursday afternoon. Nexum Corp CEO Evelyn Price has stepped down from her role, citing personal health reasons. Chief Financial Officer Adrian Cole will oversee operations on an interim basis. The company's stock rose 4%. Jason Merrill gave a brief statement to a financial wire service. He called Evelyn a remarkable founder. He said the company would honor her legacy. Legacy, as though she had died. She read the word on her phone screen 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and sat very still for approximately 4 minutes, which was roughly how long it took the specific variety of rage she was experiencing to settle into something cold and useful. Giselle came on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, with a paper bag of bread and soup and a small flash drive she had been carrying in her coat pocket for 6 days. She had been copying things quietly for 3 months before the board meeting. Not dramatically, not with a plan. The way that someone who has worked alongside a person long enough to understand the patterns will sometimes notice, without being able to articulate exactly why, that something is moving in the wrong direction, and will quietly keep a record, the way careful people do. The drive contained 4 months of internal emails, correspondence between Jason and Adrian, scheduling anomalies, one exchange that appeared benign until you read it in the context of the others, at which point it read like a rehearsal. It was not enough. Emails demonstrated intent. They did not prove financial manipulation. They could not, on their own, undo the falsified numbers. "You need someone who reads balance sheets the way detectives read crime scenes," Giselle said. "Not a lawyer, a forensic auditor." Evelyn sat with that for a moment. That night, after Giselle had gone, she lay in the dark with her hands resting on the curve of her stomach and thought about the word legacy. She thought about the 47-page document. She thought about the phrase health circumstances. She thought about the fact that somewhere inside those servers, inside those adjusted quarterly reports, there were original numbers, and original numbers do not disappear. They leave traces. They leave the faint, indelible marks of what they used to be. She sat up. She opened her personal laptop. She typed 3 words into the search bar: Forensic Financial Auditor. The first result that carried both professional credentials and independent status was a firm called Shaw and Associates. The description read, Independent Forensic Accounting and Financial Litigation Support. Specializations include equity fraud, falsified board documentation, and minority shareholder disputes. The rating was 4.9 out of 5, 22 verified reviews. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then she clicked, and she began to write. Dominic Shaw was 35 years old and ran his practice from the 3rd floor of an office building that had no large signage and no reception lobby worth mentioning. The space suited him. He was not building a brand. He was building a record, case by case, number by number, the long, slow accumulation of work done correctly. On a Tuesday afternoon, he sat behind a desk flanked by 6 monitors, each running a different spreadsheet or database query, surrounded by 3 coffee cups in 3 different stages of cooling. He had not eaten lunch. He was aware of this the way a person is aware of a sound in another room present, noted, not yet addressed. His assistant knocked at 3 o'clock exactly and said, "It's 3, Mr. Shaw." He looked up from the screen. He stood up without hesitation, without asking for 5 more minutes, without the ritual negotiation that most people perform when something interrupts their concentration. He shut down 2 of the 6 monitors, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and was at the door in under 45 seconds. His assistant had worked with him for 3 years. In that time, she had never once seen him ask for more time at 3 o'clock. Whatever was happening on those screens, whatever number he was chasing at 3 o'clock, the number waited. Everything else waited. The school was 12 minutes from the office by the route he always took. He arrived 5 minutes early, which was also always the case. Arya Shah was 7 years old. She wore her hair in 2 small pigtails that were never quite symmetrical, carried a backpack that was at least a third of her total body weight, and was reliably the last student out of her classroom because she inevitably had one more question for the teacher before she considered the school day complete. She came through the double doors holding a sheet of construction paper in both hands, protecting it with the gravity of someone transporting a document of consequence. "Bah," she said, and then caught herself, because her father had been gently reminding her for 2 years that outside the house she could use the word dad if she wanted to, though he never insisted dad. "I drew us. This is you working. I gave you a lot of papers because you always have a lot of papers." He took the drawing and looked at it. The figure representing him had hair that stood nearly vertical and was holding a single sheet of paper that was almost as large as the figure itself. The figure, representing Arya, stood next to it, slightly shorter, with what appeared to be a very large smile. He folded it carefully and placed it in the breast pocket of his jacket. There were 23 drawings in that pocket by the time autumn arrived. He never left them at the office. On the drive home, Arya fell asleep somewhere around the second traffic light, her cheek pressed against the window. Dominic drove in the quiet. His wife, Claire, had died 5 years ago. A car accident on a Wednesday morning in February, the kind of event that arrives with no warning and no language adequate to its aftermath. Arya had been 2 years old. She did not remember her mother in any concrete way, though she sometimes said things that suggested she had absorbed some essential shape of her. A warmth, a way of asking questions that assumed the world would answer. Dominic had not remarried, not because he had closed that door in any deliberate way, but in the years immediately after Claire's death, every unit of available energy had been directed toward one purpose, making certain that Arya grew up without the specific quality of absence that he feared most, the kind a child feels not in the big moments, but in the ordinary Tuesday afternoon ones. And somewhere in the discipline of that effort, it had simply become the shape of his life. The work, the 3 o'clock pickup, the drawings in the breast pocket, the quiet drives home. He understood, at a cellular level, what it cost to lose something you had built with your life. He understood it in a way that could not be learned from a textbook or a case file, and because of that understanding, he had never once questioned a client who fought to hold on to something that mattered to them even when the fighting looked, from the outside, like it couldn't possibly succeed. He was reading email that evening when he found it. The subject line read, "Asterisk potential case corporate equity fraud, Nexum Corp asterisk." He read it once. Then he read it again. The email was not emotional. It did not contain appeals for sympathy or lengthy personal history. It contained a specific description of the situation, a precise articulation of what the writer believed had been done and how, and 3 targeted technical questions about forensic methodology. The writer clearly understood financial structures. She was not asking him to explain the process to her. She was asking whether the process could yield what she needed. He recognized the quality of thinking in those 3 questions. It was the thinking of someone who had already done the preliminary analysis themselves and arrived at a wall that required a specific tool to get past. He typed a reply. Asterisk, Wednesday. 9 a.m., my office. Bring everything you have. Asterisk, he sent it. Then he returned to the spreadsheet that was still open on the center screen. He did not know who Evelyn Price was. He did not know what the case would require, or where it would eventually lead him. He knew one thing. The numbers in a falsified report always tell on themselves. Someone who knew how to listen could hear them. She arrived on Wednesday in a long coat that she wore buttoned despite the mild weather. She set down a flash drive, a printed folder, and a dark blue-bound document on his desk before she had finished sitting down. Dominic shook her hand. He did not look at the coat. He did not ask about her health or her circumstances or anything other than whether she preferred coffee or water. When she said water, he got it. He opened the dark blue document. He turned through the first 3 pages in silence, reading with the specific quality of attention that makes no external noise, no commentary, no reactive sounds. On page 12, he stopped. "This table has been adjusted," he said. It was not a question. "I know," Evelyn said. "Who did it?" "Adrian Cole, the CFO. But I can't prove it." He looked up from the page. "Not yet." He explained how he would approach it. Not simplified, not rushed. He laid out the methodology in 3 distinct layers: internal consistency analysis within the document itself, cross-referencing against externally filed financial records that existed independent of the board's version, and metadata forensics on the digital files, modification dates, user credentials, IP addresses. Every layer built on the one before it. Every layer narrowed the field until what remained was not an allegation but a documented fact. Evelyn followed every word without asking him to repeat anything or slow down. She asked 2 precise clarifying questions, both of which demonstrated that she had already thought through the implications of each layer before he described them. It was the first time in several weeks that he felt he was working alongside someone rather than working for them. After 4 hours, he found it. A discrepancy in the third quarter revenue figures. The number in the board report was $2,300,000 higher than the same quarter's number in the corresponding tax filing, a public document, externally verified, created by a different team under a different compliance framework. This was not a rounding error. This was not ambiguity. This was a number that had been placed, with intention, into a document that would be read only by people who were not expected to cross-reference it. Evelyn stared at the screen. Her hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "That's the surface," Dominic said. "If they did it in Q3, they did it before. How long to find the full picture?" 2 weeks. If you can get me access to the raw internal accounting files. I don't have access anymore." He paused for 1 beat. "Does Giselle?" At 4 o'clock, his phone lit up with the name of Aria's school. He stood immediately. 20 minutes, he said, already moving toward his jacket. Evelyn nodded. She watched him go the way he moved, the completeness of the transition, the absence of apology in it. When he was gone, she sat alone in the office for the first time. The 6 monitors hummed quietly. On the corkboard beside the window, a crayon drawing was pinned at the top with a single tack, a figure with vertical hair and a giant piece of paper, standing next to a smaller figure with an enormous smile. She placed her hand on her stomach. The baby turned slowly, a long rolling movement, unhurried. She was still looking at the drawing when she heard the door. Aria came in first, because she always came in first, carrying the remnants of an ice cream bar and trailing conversation about something that had happened at lunch. She stopped when she saw Evelyn, surveyed the situation with the calm confidence of a person who has never been taught that adults are not also worth examining, and said directly, "Your stomach is really big. Is there a baby in there?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "The baby is probably sleeping. I always fall asleep when I sit still for a long time too." Dominic said her name once, quietly. Aria redirected her attention to the ice cream. Evelyn looked at the child, and then she looked at the man standing in the doorway with his jacket still half on, watching his daughter with the particular expression of a parent who is simultaneously correcting and quietly amazed by the person they are raising. For the first time since she had signed that paper, she smiled. It was small, but it was real. They returned to the work. The plan was settled. Giselle would use her remaining access to pull raw accounting exports before that access was terminated. Dominic would audit backward. 2 weeks. Day 9 of the 2-week plan. Giselle had extracted the 3rd batch of accounting files when the automated security system flagged her activity. The email was immediate. Asterisk. Unusual access pattern detected, account activity logged for review. Asterisk. She deleted the notification. She knew it didn't matter. The following morning, her access card no longer opened the door to the 12th floor. By midday, a letter from Nexum Corp's legal team arrived at Evelyn's apartment. It cited the non-disclosure and non-interference clauses of the termination agreement. It alleged that she had violated those clauses through the unauthorized collection of internal documentation. It requested that she cease all such activities immediately and preserve all materials for potential litigation review. 2 hours later, a financial reporter sent her a text message, asking if she would comment on rumors of a personal investigation connected to her departure. Jason was releasing information in controlled fragments. He didn't need a courtroom. He needed a headline with a question mark. He needed doubt, distributed early enough to neutralize whatever was coming before it arrived. On the same afternoon, an anonymous complaint was filed with the National Independent Auditors Commission. The complaint alleged that one Dominic Shaw had entered into a professional engagement with a material conflict of interest related to the Nexum Corp matter. It was a clean piece of work. If the complaint gained traction, Dominic's license could be suspended pending review. His findings, however thorough, would be inadmissible in any formal proceeding while the investigation was open. He read the notification in the afternoon. He sat with it for a moment. He set it down. He finished the cup of coffee in front of him and turned back to the screen. His assistant knocked and asked, with genuine concern, whether he wanted to pause the engagement. "Not until it's done," he said. That night, Evelyn called him at 11. "I can't let you keep going," she said. "Aria needs you here. If your license is suspended because of this..." There was a silence at the other end. Not the silence of someone preparing a speech, the silence of someone considering whether to say something true. "Evelyn," he said, "did you ever wonder why I took this case? Because I'm paying you. That's not why." She waited. "I took it because that 47-page report was designed to knock someone down before they could speak, before they could defend themselves. I've seen that kind of document before. I know exactly what it takes to build one, and I know exactly what it means when someone spends that much time building one." His voice was level and plain. "I'm good at this, and I'm not going to stop because someone filed a complaint they knew wouldn't hold." She did not respond immediately. "Get some sleep," he said. "There's still work tomorrow." The next morning, Dominic made Aria's breakfast and helped her find the shoe that had somehow ended up under the couch. He was tying the second shoelace when she looked at him directly and said, "Are you happy today, Dad?" "Yes," he said. She studied his face with the unsettling accuracy that 7-year-olds sometimes display. "Your eyes don't look happy." He sat back on his heels and looked at his daughter. There was a long moment in which he considered various versions of what a parent is supposed to say in that situation. Then he said, "I'm doing something hard right now, but I know it's the right thing to do." Aria thought about this with visible seriousness. "Then just keep doing it," she said, and went to get her backpack. He stayed crouched by the couch for another second, alone in the kitchen. He thought, that is exactly right. That is the entire answer. Day 13, 2 in the morning. Dominic called Evelyn. "I have it," he said. 6 quarters of adjusted financial data, not 1 or 2 6 consecutive reporting periods, each containing the same category of manipulation, executed by the same method, at the same stage of the reporting cycle. The modifications were applied to revenue recognition figures in a way that produced an inflated picture of operating performance. The cumulative false surplus, stacked across those 6 quarters, amounted to $11,400,000. Adrian Cole's digital fingerprints were on every file, not in a figurative sense. Literally, username, timestamp, and IP address in the metadata of each modified document, all resolving to the CFO's office terminal between the hours of 11 at night and 2 in the morning. Always the night before those reports were distributed to the board. And then there was the email chain, encrypted, stored on a backup server that had not been wiped because no one had thought to wipe it, perhaps because no one had expected anyone to look there. Dominic had looked there. He always looked everywhere. The chain showed a series of approvals, not explicit instructions, not a written order that said, "Times falsify these numbers." Asterisk. It was more surgical than that. Forwarded summaries, responses that consisted only of a single word or a brief affirmation sent from an IP address registered to a private office. The private office of Jason Merrill. And the final piece. A public filing from 3 years prior, showing that Jason Merrill held a 12% equity stake in Crestford Group, the company that had proposed the merger Evelyn had rejected. The merger that would have made Jason's stake worth approximately $40 million. "They built this 6 months before you got pregnant," Dominic said. Evelyn was quiet on the line. They started when you declined the Crestford deal, he continued. The pregnancy gave them a convenient narrative, but the motivation was financial from the beginning. She exhaled slowly. Jason wanted that merger. Jason stood to make $40 million from that merger. You were the obstacle. Another silence. The annual shareholder meeting is in 36 hours, she said. I know. She still owned 31% of the company's equity. The termination agreement had purchased her executive title, her access, her voice inside the building, but it had not touched her shares. Under the corporate charter's Section 14, paragraph 3, any shareholder holding more than 25% of issued stock could submit a motion for inclusion in the annual meeting agenda, provided the submission was received no less than 48 hours before the scheduled meeting time. She had submitted the motion 36 hours earlier. The plan: appear at the annual shareholder meeting as the company's largest individual shareholder. Request the floor. Present the forensic audit report. Move to invalidate the board resolution that had transferred executive authority. Move to initiate an independent investigation into the adjusted financial records. The risk: Jason would attempt to block the proceedings through procedural objections. The press would be in the hallway, and Evelyn would be standing in front of a boardroom, 8 months pregnant, without an official title, facing a man who had spent most of a year preparing for this exact scenario. Dominic asked if she could do it. She said, I built that company from nothing. I can do this. Thursday morning, 8:45. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk outside the Nexum Corp Tower. The building was glass and steel, and it caught the morning light in a way that made it look almost neutral, as though it had no memory, no loyalty, no record of the woman who had chosen its address and signed its lease and named it. Giselle stood on her left. Dominic stood one step behind, and to her right exactly one step. That was the right distance. He understood instinctively that this was her moment, and his role was to carry what she needed, not to lead. Are you okay? Giselle asked quietly. Ask me later, Evelyn said. She walked through the doors. The 22nd floor conference suite held approximately 200 people. Institutional investors, board members, analysts. 2 financial journalists who had been granted access as press observers. The air was the specific kind of controlled and recirculated that large formal rooms always produce, temperature managed, slightly too cool, with no outside sounds. Jason Merrill sat at the head of the presiding table. He saw her the moment she walked in. His expression moved through something 1 second, a fraction before it resettled into composure. He had prepared for many outcomes. He had clearly not fully prepared for this one. Evelyn, he said, in a tone calibrated to suggest gentle surprise. This is the annual shareholder meeting. You're no longer affiliated with. I remain the single largest individual shareholder of this company. She placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of him, and per Section 14, paragraph 3 of the corporate charter, I submitted a motion for inclusion in today's agenda 48 hours ago. The motion was received and time-stamped by the corporate secretary's office at 9:17 2 mornings ago. I have the confirmation. She placed a second sheet beside the envelope. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when no one is certain what happens next. Jason's legal counsel stood up and began a procedural objection grounded in the terms of the termination agreement. The objection was prepared. It was carefully constructed. It moved through 3 distinct arguments in approximately 90 seconds. When he finished, Evelyn responded to all 3 in sequence. She did not raise her voice. She did not accelerate her delivery. She answered each point directly, citing the relevant section of the charter or the applicable clause of securities law. And when she had finished, she said, "The termination agreement restricts my operational role. It does not restrict my rights as a shareholder. Those are not the same thing." The door to the conference suite opened. Dominic Shaw walked in, dark suit, the folder of documentation under his left arm. He came to a stop inside the room and addressed the assembled group. My name is Dominic Shaw. I hold certification number FFA 4471 from the National Independent Auditors Commission. At the request of this company's largest individual shareholder, I have conducted a forensic review of Nexum Corp's financial reporting over the past 6 quarters. I'm prepared to present my findings to the board and to any shareholder who requests it. The representative from Harbison Group, an investment fund that held 18% of Nexum Corp's issued equity, making them the second-largest shareholder in the room, raised his hand. "I'd like to hear the findings." 2 more hands followed. Then, a fourth. Jason said nothing. Dominic connected to the presentation system and began. He did not use emotional language. He did not allege, accuse, or interpret. He presented data. The first slide showed 2 columns: the third quarter revenue figure from the board report and the same quarter's figure from the corresponding tax filing. The gap between them was $2,300,000. A single horizontal line connected the 2 numbers. He let the room read it without narration for 5 full seconds. The second slide showed the same analysis across 6 consecutive quarters. The shape of the manipulation became visible the moment the data was organized chronologically. A consistent upward distortion in the board-facing numbers, quarter over quarter, steady and methodical and invisible to anyone who had access to only one of the 2 datasets. The third slide showed the metadata: username, timestamp, IP address, repeated 6 times across 6 quarters, with the precision of something performed according to a routine. The fourth slide showed the email chain dates redacted for initial presentation, content visible, forwarded summaries, single-word approvals, a chain of explicit awareness, documented digitally, stored on a server that had not been cleared. The fifth slide showed the public equity disclosure from 3 years prior. Jason Merrill's name. The Crestford Group, 12%, the approximate value of that stake if the proposed merger had been completed. Adrian Cole stood up and said it was fabricated. The Harbison Group representative said, without raising his voice, "Mr. Cole, please sit down." A board member, one of the 3 who had attended the private meeting in October, who had been quiet since Evelyn had entered the room, set down the copy of the report he had been reviewing. He looked across the table at Jason and said, "Jason, I need you to explain slide 4. Jason looked at Evelyn. For the first time in the entire proceeding, for the first time perhaps, in a very long time, he looked at her without anything else behind the look. No strategy, no performance, no calculation about what impression he was managing. She looked back at him steadily. Power does not always dissolve in a dramatic moment. Sometimes it dissolves in a silence, the particular silence of a room full of people, realizing, one by one, that they have been given a version of events that was constructed for them rather than reported to them. That was the silence that filled the 22nd floor. The Harbison representative assumed temporary chair of the proceedings and called for votes. The resolution to suspend the board's transfer of executive authority was put to a vote. It passed, 7-2. The resolution to open an independent investigation into the company's financial reporting practices over the previous 6 quarters was put to a vote. It passed, 8-1. The resolution to appoint an interim chief executive to serve during the investigation period, with Evelyn Price nominated, was put to a vote. It passed, 6-3. Adrian Cole left the room before the 4th vote was called. He did not look at anyone on his way out. Jason Merrill sat in his chair and looked at the table. The room fractured into motion lawyers and investors and advisors moving toward each other in clusters, voices overlapping, phones appearing from jacket pockets. Giselle crossed the room and held Evelyn without words. It was a long moment. In the corner, Dominic was closing his documentation folder, aligning the pages, pressing the cover flat. He worked with the same absence of ceremony with which he had begun, as though the outcome was simply the natural result of the method, and the method had simply been applied correctly. Evelyn walked across the room to where he stood. "Thank you," she said. "I read the numbers." "No. You stayed when I told you to leave." He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the morning light over the city, which was ordinary and unhurried, and completely indifferent to what had just happened in this room. "Arya asked me last night if we'd won yet. I told her I didn't know." He paused. "Now I know." The independent investigation confirmed every element of Dominic's findings within 3 weeks of its commencement. Adrian Cole resigned from the company and began cooperating with the federal prosecutor's office in exchange for a reduced recommendation on sentencing. His cooperation included a detailed account of the method, the timeline, and the instructions he had received. Jason Merrill resigned from the board of directors. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal inquiry into insider trading related to his Crestford Group holdings and the timing of the decisions made in his capacity as a Nexum Corp board member. The complaint filed against Dominic's professional license was reviewed and dismissed. The commission noted in its finding that the complaint contained no substantiated allegation and appeared to have been filed without factual basis. A national business publication ran a cover story on the case. The headline was straightforward and correct. Giselle was formally appointed as Director of Executive Operations. She had already been doing most of that work without the title. On her first day back in the building as interim chief executive, Evelyn rode the elevator to the 20th floor. The hallway was the same hallway, the same lighting, the same carpeting, the same particular hum of the building's systems, moving air through its structure. She had walked this hallway more than 1,000 times. She knew the exact spot near the second set of doors where the carpet had a slight rise from where it had been repaired the previous spring. The team was there. Not everyone, not the entire 800, but the people from her floor, from adjacent floors, gathered in the corridor when word reached them that she had arrived. They did not applaud. They did not call out. They stood, which was different. The kind of standing that people do not choreograph and cannot fake, the kind that means something specific about what they believe. She walked past them and went directly to her office. She sat down. She opened her laptop. There were 847 unread emails. She started with the first one. 6 weeks after the shareholder meeting, at 3:14 in the morning, Evelyn Price delivered a son. She named him Elliot Price. He carried her name, and her name only not because there was no other story attached to his beginning, but because she was his story. She was the person who had stayed. She was the person who had sat in a dark apartment and opened a laptop at 2 in the morning instead of surrendering to the version of events that someone else had written for her. He arrived loud and emphatic, and 8 pounds exactly. And when the nurse placed him in her arms, Evelyn looked at him for a long time without saying anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said out loud. The baby who had kicked hardest in the moment she signed the resignation letter had arrived on a morning in March, in a world where the resignation had been overturned, and the woman who had signed it was the chief executive of the company she had built from nothing, and justice, imperfect and procedural, and slow as it is, had moved in the right direction. Dominic and Aria came to the hospital on a Sunday. Aria was carrying a rolled piece of construction paper, which she presented to Evelyn with the solemnity appropriate to the occasion. She had drawn a baby in what appeared to be a floating circle representing, she explained, the inside of a stomach with a large smile and 2 very round eyes. "I drew this for the baby before he was born," she said, "but then he came out before I could give it to you, so here it is now." Evelyn unrolled it and looked at it carefully. She thanked Aria with the specific sincerity that children can always detect and rarely receive from adults. Dominic stood in the doorway of the hospital room. One step inside, he was watching Aria hold Elliot with the concentrated caution of a child who understands that she is holding something irreplaceable. "Did you ever think about having more children?" Evelyn asked. She was not looking at him when she said it. "Sometimes," he said. He was not looking at her when he said it. Aria had begun singing to the baby in a low, made-up melody that had no consistent key and was entirely her own. It was the least musical performance imaginable, and one of the most earnest. The room was warm and quiet and full of the particular light that Sunday mornings in hospitals sometimes hold soft and unhurried and strangely kind. There was nothing else that needed to be said. The room had said it. Weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Evelyn sat at her desk in the office with Elliot asleep in the small crib that had been installed beside the window at Giselle's insistence, and over Evelyn's initial mild objection. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. Aria wants to know when Elliot will be old enough to learn to draw. She says she wants to teach him. Evelyn looked at the message. She looked at her son, who was sleeping with the complete conviction of someone who has never had a single thing to worry about. She typed back. Tell Aria that Elliot is already waiting. She set the phone down and returned to the document she had been reviewing. It was a proposal for a new partnership, a hospital network in the Pacific Northwest, 400 beds, a 3-year contract. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Outside the window, The city ran through its ordinary Tuesday, with total indifference, all its lights and movement and competing purposes going forward, without ceremony, the way cities do. That was the first message Evelyn Price had sent in a long time that had nothing to do with fighting for something. It was simply something she wanted. There are battles that seem lost the moment they begin, not because the person fighting them is weak, but because the person standing across from them started preparing long before the fight was announced. Evelyn Price signed that paper not because she had surrendered. She signed it because, in that moment, she believed she was standing alone. But being alone is not the same as being without options. And asking for help is not a confession of weakness. Sometimes the clearest form of strength is knowing when to reach through the dark and trust that someone on the other side will reach back. Dominic Shaw did not save her. He read the numbers that she already knew were wrong and found the way to prove it. The proving was technical. The courage was hers. She had sat in an empty apartment and opened a laptop at 2 in the morning when she could have stayed in the dark. That choice, quiet, unobserved, unwitnessed by anyone, was the moment the battle turned. Not in the boardroom, not in front of 200 shareholders. In a kitchen, alone, by the light of a screen, and Arya, 7 years old, with mismatched pigtails and a backpack too large for her body, had given both of them the only piece of advice that mattered when everything was difficult and uncertain and the outcome was not yet clear. Asterisk. Just keep doing it. Asterisk. Never mistake the moment someone falls for the moment they have been defeated. They are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing.